Hey, good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Ken.
Good evening. Welcome to episode 101 of Line Upon Line. Um, we're going to be discussing Daniel. You thought it was Noah, but we just wanted to mess you up a bit. I posted Noah instead of Daniel. They're flip flops. So anyway, we're going to talk about Daniel being a hero of the Bible. And why don't you take us out, Dr. Ricks?
Okay, this particular story is called Pecans in the Cemetery. On the outskirts of a small city, a small town, there was a big old pecan tree, a giant one. And it was right inside the cemetery fence. So one day, two boys filled up a bucket full of, had brought bags of nuts, and sat down by the tree, out of sight, began dividing the nuts. And they said, one for me, one for you, one for me, one for you. But then a few of the nuts fell out of the bucket and rolled down toward the fence. A third boy came riding along on his bicycle by the road, and as he passed by, he heard, one for you, one for me, one for you, one for me. He was shocked. He jumped off his bicycle. He saw an old man hobbling down the road in a cane. He said, come here quickly. You won't believe what I heard. Satan and the Lord are down at the cemetery dividing up the souls. The old man said, beat it. Can't you see I can hardly walk? But he said, no, I'm telling the truth. Come on down. So he hobbled down to the fence and he heard, one for you, one for me, one for you, one for me. The old man whispered, boy, you've been telling me the truth. Let's see if we can get a look at the Lord. Shaking with fear, they peered through the wrought iron fence, but weren't able to see anything. They were well hidden. The old man gripped the wrought iron bars a little tighter. And then he heard, one more for you, one more for me. Well, that's all. Now let's go and get those nuts by the fence and we'll be done. They said the old man got back to town 5 minutes ahead of the kid on the bicycle.
Material's getting here.
I got
the old man with the cane might have passed him.
Children's story. This is called Children's Logic. The teacher said, give me a sentence about public servants, said the teacher. The small boy wrote, the fireman came down the ladder pregnant. The teacher took the lad aside to correct him. Don't you know what the word pregnant means? She asked. Sure, replied the young boy. It means carrying a child. Kind of hits you slow that the fireman's carrying a child heroically. Oh, well. When I got to explain my jokes, anyway, they hit some areas fast, some slow. Well, world events this week. The biggest thing, I think we heard it this morning, and I heard it later further. A lady from Business News said what they do is they give the original first quarter numbers, but they're estimates. They refine it, do all the number crunching, and they get the actual answer. The actual first quarter was almost 1% decline in the economy, 0.7. Negative numbers. The economy actually went backwards. Normally about 2% to 2.5% is what you need to offset population growth. 2.5 to 3 would be the best. For the job, to produce enough jobs for the population growth. So 1.5 or 2 are kind of stagnant economy. But a negative number, that's rarely do you ever see that. I mean, except maybe the beginning of a crash of the stock market or something like we had in the beginning of 2008. Or was that the end of 2008? Whatever that was. And that is bad news. So in other words, not only are we not in a recovery, we're still in a stagnant economy, and according to one of those experts, we're halfway into a recession. Also, I heard this week China's economy is slowing down, and Greece hasn't actually fully agreed to pay off all their debts. They're pushing the can down the road with some temporary measures. That means the euro's problems are not solved. They're just pushing them down the road. And I think there's an emergency, or maybe not emergency, but a meeting. Germany's called a meeting of all the central banking people in Europe, which includes the G8, which includes America, next week. That sounds to me like they're worried about the world economy.
Yeah, if you took out the actual numbers for the economy, for the unemployment, if you figure them as they used to be figured back during the Depression era, we are at Depression era unemployment. I was talking to someone at a local Walmart, and I think he was one of the management, or he involved in interviewing people. He said they had a job fair, and there was 127 or something people showed up to the job fair for jobs, and 9 passed the drug test.
You mean out of 100?
And 27, he says it happens all the time. They can't pass the drug test. That's how bad. And this is not known as any kind of bad area. I mean, we're half out in the country here. If you go one direction, you're out in the country. You go the other direction, you're in a small town. You go further, you're in Toledo. But it's not a bad area. And out of 127, I think 9 passed drug test, and that's typical.
Are we becoming, like they were saying, maybe half the people are pulling the weight for the other half? It's almost that bad. Not quite, but almost that bad. Are we becoming a really decadent society?
I think so. For my job, I go all over the state, and I talk to people all the time, and I go to areas that don't look too terribly bad, and they tell me how bad the heroin and how bad the cocaine is in that area, and all kinds of drugs that, you don't see it, I mean, obviously, but it's bad. I mean, they're talking it's how bad it really is in these areas, and it's unbelievable.
A couple of years ago, I had a really pretty young lady come in my place and asked if I was hiring, and I said I was not. My wife was there with me, and she starts telling me that I don't remember the exact story, but she's trying to work and go to school because her mother can't keep a job because of her drug problems. And I asked her how old she was, and I think she was 16, something like that. And she says, I guess I'm going to try to find a job as a stripper so I can make some real money. And I talked her out of that. And a year or two later, her mom came in. I got to know her, and I see the problem. And that's a really sad situation. And the mother can't keep a job and is in terrible condition. And so this kid's out trying to find something to put food on the table in the house.
See, we're not, speaking for myself, but we're in the church. We're not exposed to this stuff much, I don't think. And we don't keep friends like that, so we don't know. I don't think we understand how bad I believe it is. I think it's a much worse problem than we probably understand.
I think society is broken down, morally anyway.
And that's possibly why the reason they're turning to drugs.
Speaking of decadent societies, did anybody mention the election in Ireland last week?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, the vote, yeah.
It was like 63% yes.
And I understand that Ireland then is the first country to ever, and they voted overwhelmingly. It was like 2-1. And that is just, everybody loves Ireland and all the lore about Ireland, and it tears your heart out to think about that, the country where Jeremiah came. It's just, I think it's very possible that it could bring plagues upon Ireland. And, you know, there's microorganisms out there that nobody even knows exists. And the biblical history is that God reacts to these things. And I'm just, I'm fearful for them now.
Because in a way, that's worse than in America. In America, the judges have pushed it, but the people have. I mean, whenever, with rare exception, comes up on ballots in America, even in California, it loses. The judges have pushed it, but in Ireland, the people pushed it. I guess it shows the power of the media, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I was listening to them talk about the economy. Just a few things that, and obviously, experts don't agree, but it makes sense. They said one of the things that that hurt the U.S. economy, and it goes on with that article that my wife and I wrote in the 21st Century Watch a little bit, oil. We didn't realize it, but you know, mining oil is sort of like manufacturing. It's one of the few manufacturing areas where America has a lot of going. Well, ever since OPEC, you know, the Saudi princes have been pushing prices down instead of the opposite that you would expect. They've been closing marginal mines and doing less exploratory drilling so that the oil industry is not lifting the economy, it's helping pull the economy down. And the extra money that people save from gas prices, based on the articles that we read, the people are not spending in stores. Retail stores are not up. You're going to say, well, why are people spending that extra $500 to $600 a year they get on oil prices? They think because the public doesn't have a lot of confidence in the economy, and they're saving the money, but not spending it. Or for whatever reasons, they're not spending it.
That's true.
We're going to have to spend some on hamburger because I went to the market today and it was $4.49 a pound in 2 different stores.
Oh,
Wow.
Also they think chickens and eggs will be going up because of the bird flu.
Yep, I heard about that out west. Yeah.
I'm also hearing, I don't know how true this is, but I'm got it from a guy that I trust. He says that China's not necessarily buying gold anymore, that they're actually buying the gold mines and then just mining to themselves. So that might be really wise because when you're mining, you don't know what's down there. You just can suspect through information you gather as you go. So he's telling me that they're not buying the actual gold by the pound or ounce or whatever anymore, that they're just buying the mines and going to get in it themselves.
Oh, and they said there are normally 2 ways you can stimulate the economy when it turns down. One is government spending programs. The problem with that is they've run up such a humongous debt that they don't know if they can really do any more spending. Then they say, well, maybe the Fed could stimulate the economy by lowering interest rates, but they can't do that because interest rates have been rock bottom for 6 years. There's nowhere else to go. Because the Fed has done all the tricks they can do. There's not, you know, according to them, there's nothing else the Fed can do to spur the economy. The only thing left was lower taxes, especially lower capital gains taxes, which will stimulate. And actually, John F. Kennedy and later Ronald Reagan both proved it. When you lower those taxes, you get more capital activity, more jobs, more business growth, and actually the money turns over more frequently, so you get more taxes. And you can pay off stuff. But the problem there is this administration they don't believe in they believe in income redistribution. They don't want the big guys to get a break. And they're not going to do that. So they say they don't see anything that's going to stimulate our economy right at this moment.
Yeah, it flies in the face of their ideology, lowering capital gains.
Yeah.
And taxes.
So now they might change. There's one other thing that can stimulate the economy. Dare I say it? It's
War.
It's a 3-letter word.
War.
And I know that when you say this, you make people mad, and so I understand that these are complex issues. If you go back to the last 5 or 6 big wars, they actually did stimulate the economy. And you could argue, though I know it's more complicated than that, one of the reasons, I even saw this the other night going back to World War One, though admittedly World War One is more complicated. There were more reasons than that, because there were a lot of atrocities in World War One too, by the Turks and the Germans, and especially, and terrible things being done to France, and I think Woodrow Wilson liked France. A lot of people did, but it did help the U.S. economy, both shipping arms to England as well as going to war.
We also made our own equipment back then. You know, a lot of the auto plants turned into making Jeeps and trucks and tanks and whatever, and we don't have that anymore. While our men were out at work, our ladies were in the plants manufacturing vehicles and whatever else. Those plants are shut down. We outsourced that all over the place.
Yeah, we were the leading manufacturer of just about everything, and we had all those active plants that we could convert, and they converted them overnight, and that's what won the war, was the ability to convert all the existing manufacturing over to existing war machines and war munitions, and we have nothing to convert.
So let me ask you all the question. And I know it's not fair to say they fought the Vietnam War and other wars because it helped the economy, because I recognize bottling up communism. You know, I understand there are more reasons than one, but it did help the economy. Is there any chance that this administration will feel desperate enough economically that they would go to war?
I don't think so.
The next one might.
I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm merely asking the question. The reason I'm asking is this week also, you know, last week they lost the Anbar province to ISIL, which cuts off at least that eastern northern wing of Iraq from Syria and all the outside roads from Syria. Josh Earnest, the president's spokesman, said, and I actually heard him say it twice because it was played back on another show. He said the United States is not responsible for the security of Iraq, even though they said other things in earlier years that it was all stable and wonderful, but still, they're not responsible. We can give them weapons, but it's up to their army to win it or lose it. Now, is that almost an indirect way of conceding defeat?
They don't have the belly to defend the country like our presidents did in the past. I don't know why that fight's in them. Everybody's got an opinion, but they just don't have that fight in them, like the presidents we had in the past that would actually draft people into the military and say, you're going. You know, we're going to go over and we're going to win this and we're going to do it right and be done with it. For whatever reason, that fight's not there.
Well, you know, I think they're perfectly content to let the economy collapse. I think they're perfectly content to let the United States dwindle into a third world nation status. I don't really think it's about will or not will. I think their will is to see the disintegration of the United States.
Right, and I think you're right.
There's a tsunami that's coming one way or another. It's already here.
Yeah, this didn't start 6.5 years ago. This has been coming at us for a while.
The president is more interested in making America into what they would probably call a socialist paradise and not get involved in world affairs. And that probably is the thinking. By the way, do you know China is armed some of those atoll islands to control the South China trade routes? And this week they put heavy artillery and airfields on them and warned American scout planes to stay away. My assumption is China's flexing its muscle. They want to control the trade routes. Countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and Japan are upset about it, And one thing I think they're learning, it's subtle, but they can't count on America to make the Chinese behave.
Read something, I don't remember what it was. Japan and Germany are talking about signing some kind of alliance with each other militarily in case things go haywire. I saw that. I wasn't alive then, but I can read my history and see that combination in the past.
Yep.
And remember, Germany said a few months ago their goal is to build a world-class military. Japan has changed their constitution so they can develop an offensive military. I'm sure indirectly they're saying one that could compete with China at sea. So, as America's military declines and the bad actors' militaries increases, we see the world is going to change, and it might work out real. We might not have any big problems for a few years, but the problems are coming. Don't you? You can kind of feel it, can't you?
Yep. Yep. And if we get dictatorial leadership, I mean, eventually. Well, okay. So if it gets to but my point is, leadership could get so bad, or it probably will at some point. Maybe not now. Maybe not in 5 or 10. But where Christianity is oppressed so bad that it wants us to deny our Christianity, kind of like what Daniel went through, is which our subject tonight. So kind of like what Daniel had to go through, and then he's a good way. Looking to Daniel and his example and his friends would give us guidance to how to handle it in case it ever comes to that point here. We could see the things that happened in Babylon could reoccur here. Not that we'd become, but where we could see similar things. And I'm not saying we're going to become exactly like that, but we could see some similar issues where our Christianity, especially our true Christianity, is shunned.
Well, they are. They're pushing the homosexual agenda at the churches pretty hard. Did you guys read what Joel Osteen said? Peter, Paul, and John should not have written the things in the New Testament that they wrote. There's enough condemnation in society that he did not have to put that that they should not have put that into writing.
Ooh. You know, Osteen is criticizing the Bible?
Peter, Paul, and John, I believe.
Well, that's a big chunk of the New Testament.
Yes, I believe it was on the gay rights thing. He said that there's enough condemnation in society on its own without them writing that for us to read forever.
I don't think I'd be standing too close to him in services next time.
Well, he's got a great smile. I guess that's all it takes at the moment.
Oh my gosh. There's a billboard down here on my travels, and it takes up the whole billboard.
Well, Ken used the word example in reference to Daniel, and that's a word that I was thinking of too. If there was an example of a Christian man and the way that you should conduct yourself, it would be Daniel, for the strength of his faith and everything that he went through, his absolute insistence on keeping the law of God and all of those things and everything that he went through, even going through the lion's den. But Daniel was an absolute example for any good Christian that wants to be in God's service. And then, of course, too, his prophecies were startlingly accurate. So accurate that it brought out really some criticism from the naysayers. Mm-hmm. They hated his truth. And I read that one of the ways they tried to attack the book of Daniel and his story was in questioning the date of the book of Daniel was written and even the author of it. But there was someone who did a study, and I can't remember the man's name now, but he did an in-depth study and he refuted all of that. But those critics were really out there trying to disprove him.
Yep. He's a good example for living, if you're living in a hostile, oppressive government. He's a good hero of sorts.
Just think about it.
A good example of a servant too. The fact that he would go on, he would pray every day, and he would fast a lot, and he would. What's that fast we were talking about for water and
unpleasant vegetables.
Unpleasant vegetables.
That's one
Isn't that most vegetables?
I don't know if that's one translation of it. I don't know. Maybe minimal vegetables and unpleasant ones and water for weeks and weeks and weeks. I'm sure you could live on it, but you wouldn't like it.
I don't think they really would be unpleasant. They just may not be as pleasant as vegetables coated in butter and salt and pepper and seasonings.
Yeah, that's probably
and stuffed in a cheeseburger.
Yeah, your tomatoes are surrounded by cheeseburger. But you're right. For about thousands of years, well, at least 2,000 years or so, many centuries, people have been inspired by Daniel, and he probably was 15 when they seized Jerusalem in 605. Maybe he was only 16 or 17 when he was in the Babylonian Royal Academy for the I guess the potentially top young people, and to be so brave so young is kind of amazing.
Well, he was a brilliant man, and God, on top of that, put His Holy Spirit in him, and probably a lot, and it gave him what the rest of us are striving to become. He was picked out to be the man that he turned into be, and when you have the Holy Spirit mentoring you very young, and you have a clear, sound mind, you can accomplish a lot.
There's one part of this that I would like to emphasize. I know everyone knows Daniel's story, but let me go Daniel 1, verse 8. Part of the story that I think is real interesting. Daniel 1:8. It says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart." Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat. And I imagine that probably when the eunuchs told him, "You're a lucky young man, you get to eat the food that's at the king's table." These are, I'm sure, delicacies from around the world, shellfish and escargot and fat squirrels roasted over or whatever, and and all kinds of sweet wines and extra wines and probably some stuff we might even like, but very decadent.
Wines with about 16%.
Yeah, and I can imagine, and they're saying, "Are you kidding me? You're going to refuse to eat all this super expensive food? Are you crazy?" And Daniel had determined in advance what he was not going to do, and I think that's a good advice for all of us. Before we come to the crisis, or we think it's coming ahead, determine that we're not going to do whatever we're not going to do. Determine I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to remain faithful. Just like Daniel did, make up your mind in advance so that when the crisis comes, you're prepared.
When I teach my classes, I said you need to put yourself into every scenario. Am I going to be carjacked? If I am, how's the guy to come at me? What's going to happen? And have your brain right before it happens so that you can respond appropriately. And in some ways, we don't know what's coming after us. But in other ways, the examples are in the Bible. And you got to coach yourself. When I teach my kids, I go, "Who do you listen to more than anybody?" And they'll say, "My mommy, my teacher, my daddy, you." No, you listen to yourself more than anybody. So we as Christians have got to be coaching ourselves every minute of the day. When our brain's thinking and talking in our head, we've got to be coaching ourselves and preparing ourselves to not break when the time comes. It's amazing to me, all this social media stuff. I get on Facebook sometimes, and I'll remember somebody from church, and I'll put their name in, and I'll go, "Look at that, it's them," 20 years later, 30 years later, standing by their Christmas tree, and things like that. These are people that were taught the truth, what happened. They just went to the wayside. So we've got to daily coach ourselves.
It's like having a work plan and sticking to it.
Exactly.
Discipline. Daniel was a great example of discipline.
Yeah. Oh, incredible.
Yep.
Well,
And I mean, for me, that's something I need to definitely work on, man. You can know everything you can know, but if you don't increase your discipline to resist the world and resist everything that Satan and the world throws at you, then it's going to be difficult. Especially when times get tough, you'll break easier.
The expression about the stiff-necked Jews, that God had such a hard time breaking to get them to do the right things. That being stiff-necked in the right way is a good thing. And
Absolutely.
You need to be hard-headed and disciplined and unbreakable. And you do that through prayer, you do that through study, you do that through not missing services, you do that through talking to other people in God's church and encouraging each other. But last week when you were on your way, when Ken was on his way home, he wrote something on Facebook about being home and how tired he was. So I immediately had to say something. And next thing you know, many other people were piling on, picking on him and teasing a little bit because he's a brother in God's church. But those little things make a difference. When I see somebody else make a comment and I'm like, hey, it's not just me. It's the camaraderie and the brotherhood of God's church. And we can't lose sight of that either.
Yeah, we need to support each other.
Right.
Wasn't there something about him getting too old for this kind of thing?
Yeah, driving. I drive so much. It does wear you down after a while. When you're younger, you don't think about it, but now I get out of that car after being in it for hours, I'm like an 80-year-old man getting out. I pick up speed as I get closer to the rest stop, you know? I'm shuffling like Tim Conway in Carol Burnett at first, and by the time I'm getting in there, my feet are actually coming up off the ground.
Yeah, we drove 3 weeks ago, I guess. We drove 21 hours up and 24 hours back, and I want to tell you, getting out of that car and walking in the house, it took all I had.
Yep. I was just thinking another, we keep, God's laws, we keep the Sabbath, we do what we're supposed to do, what we want to do because of what the gift was given to us, and that's in good times. And I think what we're saying is, with Daniel, can we do it? Can we hold this line in bad times when it's costing us something? I mean, a lot of people have stayed with it through losing jobs and that is commendable. But can we do it if the costs are higher even than that? And that's what I think, going through Daniel and understanding what the costs were to him and his friends, that gives us a great amount of inspiration to be able to do the same ourselves.
They tried to feed him to lions.
Yeah, it doesn't get much worse than that.
Yeah, it's worse than that. And Daniel was victorious. I mean, he won. It was, by the way, if you look at Jeremiah 24:3 all the way to 7, God uses the fig analogy. Those people who were taken in the first wave of captivity, which would include Daniel and I presume his family, they were the best of the Jewish people. Probably they were the ones who weren't overwhelmed by paganism and all the evil corruption. And so, to some extent, I know that you can't direct your kids toward the good path. The kid has to make his own decision. I think we all kind of know that by now. But I do think maybe a little bit of credit probably goes to Daniel's family too. Probably. He probably was going in a positive direction. And even before he was taken captive, his family probably stayed with the true religion. They probably never ate anything unclean. They probably didn't sacrifice to Baal. All those other bad things that many of the Jewish people were doing, I think Daniel's family never did it. And when you read Jeremiah 24, that section, you get that impression. God said, I took the best of the people out of here before the ugly siege and sent them to safety in Babylon. mean, that's odd to think of it that way, but even the stuff from the temple was taken and put in the storage library of Babylon. So all that temple material was God took it to safety, oddly enough, except for the Ark of the Covenant. No one knows what ever happened to that. But it's another
You know,
story.
it's written in Revelations where he was talking and he said, I saw in heaven and I saw the elders and I saw Christ sitting at the right hand of God and I saw the Ark of the Covenant. So, you know, how can something physical become spiritual? Only God knows. I guess he's going to do it with us. But I'm thinking possibly he took that back up there.
Could God bring it back if the Jews were to rebuild the temple? I'm just saying that, you know, God can do anything he wants, of course, but would he do that?
I don't know. I don't know. God, he does things so different than how we think. You know, I think with a carnal flesh, sometimes small mind, and you know, and God is God. You know, it's hard to understand why the things are in the motion that they're in. I'm certain that the day will come, and when we're changed and we're in His kingdom, we'll go, oh, I get it. That's why He did it that way. You know, now we just have to do our best and stay close to Him and read our Bible and pray and study and don't miss services and just do our best. And hopefully He'll see a good, clean heart in us and protect us as He did Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel was quite a young man. Of course, he was, and he actually lived to be over 80, and served two empires, two different empires, and was brave as an older man and brave as a younger man. It's kind of. By the way, when you think about Daniel and prayer, when they were going to kill the wise men because they couldn't reveal a dream, you know, Daniel 2:17. Then Daniel went to his house and made the things known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that they would desire mercies of God. In other words, he said, let's all pray that we can handle this problem. He got all of his friends to pray with him. And I think that's something we can remember too. When we pray about a particular problem, ask other church people to pray with us about the same problem.
And that's the other thing. We should probably share some of those personal things with our brothers and sisters at church so that they can pray. How do you pray for somebody that you don't know?
That's right.
You know, and people will go to their family members and say, hey, I have my back, my whatever, I'm having this issue. How much more so shouldn't our spiritual family members be there to pray for us as well?
That's right. That's a smaller example of what the forefathers did. They asked for community prayers. They asked for everybody that lived in the community in certain prayers. And,
they put up posters around town saying this is going to be a day of prayer in our town.
Yeah.
You couldn't even put those up today.
I saw something, somebody posted, I guess it was a Marine, posted a scripture, and she got herself in a bunch of trouble from posting a scripture.
It was it was on her computer screen. It was on her desktop, I think. And she got in all kinds of trouble. She's been dishonorably discharged. Her rank was lowered to private. She's having all kinds of trouble. She just recently got a lawyer, I think, and they're fighting it, and she may win this. But yeah, the military, this guy kicked her out because she had a scripture on her computer.
That's outrageous. That's like saying you can't own a Bible in your own personal room, right?
Yeah.
Yep. That's where it's getting. We're getting little. It's not. I mean, it's not the whole country, but there are these little pockets of things that we're starting to see start, and I think it may just snowball.
You know that garbage about separation between church and state being in the Constitution? It is not in the Constitution. And the people who wrote the Constitution, they not only hired chaplains for the Senate and the House, They actually held church services on Sunday in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Jefferson used the Bible as a textbook in the D.C. school district. And there are many other examples. They were very Bible oriented. And the letter that Jefferson wrote, this is after the Constitution Bill of Rights, but it wasn't part of it. And he said there should be a wall between church and state. He was writing to the Danbury Baptist Association to protect the Baptists from the government. Not to protect the government from the Baptists, but to protect the Baptists from the government. And it's amazing how the legal profession, I guess in 1947 or 50, first started. They turned what Jefferson said on its head, and then made it more than it was supposed to be.
My wife years ago had to do a diversity training program so that people could learn to whatever at work, and I have never done any of that and don't intend to. But basically, this guy showed up who was.
I haven't either. They tried to pressure me to do some of that, and I've avoided it too, luckily.
Well, she had to do or lose her job, and this guy showed up basically in drag to teach the class.
Oh, that's pretty diverse.
And then they said, one time they said, we want everybody to celebrate, and they named all these different holidays, and they left off Passover and something else. So my wife sent a message and said, you know, I didn't see some of my holidays on there. And he said, well, what are they? And she said Passover and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur or something. And he says, could you send the information on these? I've never heard of them.
Oh,
wow,
man.
he's teaching diversity.
No, that's a different guy. Different guy. Same company, different guy.
Wow.
I had to go through diversity training 15 years ago at a former employer.
Did it help?
It didn't go well because I saw through what they were. They were framing their situation, their scenario, forcing you into a certain corner. And once I seen that they were trying to be slick about this thing and forcing you into it, and then they were going to tell you how bad you were for going here. Once I seen the setup, me and another guy seen it. We said, you know what? We're not going to participate. We're just going to sit here. We're not. We see what you're doing, and the guy got very upset with us, but didn't matter. I was sticking to my guns. Me and the other guy said, no, we're not going to participate in this. It's wrong what you're doing, and we know what you're doing. The other couple of guys did it, 3 or 4 or 5, whatever it was, and it exactly what we thought was going to happen happened. I said, that's why we didn't participate. You're driving people into, you're setting your people up to feel a certain way and then turn it back on them. And I said, no.
Yeah, there's a reason I work for myself.
Yeah.
Now, I taught a class today. I said, listen, if I say anything that's offensive, it's because I'm an offensive person, and you only have to deal with me this one time. You never have to see me again. And they all laughed. So.
See, that's what you get for thinking for yourself, right? Well, I was thinking about Daniel's his second big crisis, the one about the vision and the dream, of course, is the first one, which got him his first big promotion. And then, the emperor changed, and we got Darius, who might have been actually second in charge for the Babylonian area, but maybe those historical details really aren't important. He was the big man in charge, and the rivals of Daniel, he was about to promote Daniel to be the top administrator, and all the rivals didn't want that. You see that in verse 5, and they tried to get something on Daniel, but probably this time in his life he was too old to be caught in a sex trap. He was too honest to be bribed. He probably was too efficient to catch him in making a mistake. And they concluded that his character was so good, the only thing they could get him with is the law of his God. Think of the compliment that is to Daniel.
Yeah, the
Yep,
only thing
absolutely.
the only thing we can find bad about you is you're good.
You're just
You're too good. We don't like you.
I do think some people resent at some gut level people that are too good.
They do. They try to, and that's when they try to draw them into their, they try to corrupt them to get them just as bad as they are.
I bet they tried to corrupt him with bribes of sorts. I'm sure they tried a few things, and they just could not corrupt him. He was incorruptible, unlike certain people running for president. There's no way they could get him with big bucks or any kind of bucks. So that's a great with his law, and I'm sure they also figured out that Daniel prayed 3 times a day, and if you watched his house, you could see through the window he was facing where Jerusalem would have been, where the temple used to be. So they said, aha. And then, of course, they played on the emperor's vanity. That's probably a pretty easy thing to play on. Because by the way, those emperors were worshipped as gods. And we think that's one reason that once they make a law and sign it, at least for so many days, maybe like 30 days only, it cannot be changed because his word is like that of a god. And, you can see it playing on the man's vanity. And nobody can worship any god for 30 days. And it'll help unify the new kingdom. Actually, they did that later in the Roman Empire. And later years, everyone once you had to burn incense to Caesar and kind of bow to Caesar. And they said it was sort of like an oath of loyalty and unity for the empire. But Christians said, well, we can be loyal, but we can't burn incense or bow to Caesar. And at certain times, they allowed that as an excuse for persecution. And it only made Christians stronger, oddly enough. It didn't work.
I'm being told by a fellow church down here, and I'm going to mess this up, but I'll do my best, that I think it was David Cameron came out and said, it's not enough to obey the law. You will love the government.
Oh, that's a new one. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, I heard that from a fellow at church. He said that I don't know where he got it, but it's not enough to just obey the law. You will love the government, is what he said.
Yep, the government is the end-all, be-all. The government is actually setting itself up to replace God. That's what they want. If your rights come from God, government can't take them away. If your rights come from the government, they can control you like a slave.
You see,
that's the one big thing about the U.S. Constitution. The men who wrote it were inspired. They said the rights derive from the Creator.
Well, and here's the thing: is they don't teach our kids what the Constitution says. They don't know who Thomas Paine was. These people, and they're voting, let alone read any of his writings. They don't even know who he was. And his book, his pamphlet, Common Sense, was so packed with information about our nation and about who we are as a people, and our kids don't know that.
Didn't Hitler at one time, it seems like I read that he fancied himself as being Jesus Christ or like Jesus Christ? Do you remember anything about that, James?
I think when they said Hail Hitler, it was done in the model of Hail Caesar. Because Kaiser means Caesar in German. Hitler became a German Caesar. I don't know. I think he believed he was being worshipped. I don't know if the people fully saw it that way when they said Heil Hitler, but they were hailing him like they hailed Caesar. And he even said in one of his speeches that he was Germany and Germany was Hitler. I'm Deutschland. And anyway, the way he said it sounds more poetic than the way I'm saying it, but basically he said he was Germany and Germany was him. And, worshiping big government, and of course the Nazis were socialists, National Socialist Party. Worshiping big government is a bad idea, as I think World War II really proved without a shadow of a doubt.
And it can happen again.
Yeah, you're right, David. It can happen again. And I think if you look at some of the things that are going on, not just in this country, but in other countries, different aspects of how bits and pieces of Nazi Germany became into being are being played out in different countries across the world. It's just history repeating itself. And obviously, 70 years or so is long enough for people to forget. As amazing as that sounds, is to forget what past was and what different leaders and things, how they operate and how they get to their ends and how it can repeat itself. People can't see it coming, and a lot of us see it coming, but most of the world in this country just going, oh, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that to us.
It comes with dumbing down the population so that they're stuck on stupid.
Yep.
And this guy said to Waters World, he said to a young lady in, I guess, New York somewhere, and he said, "Are you worried about our borders?" And she goes, "No, nothing can happen here. We're in New York."
By the way, even Jesus himself referred to the prophecy of Daniel vocally. It was Matthew 24 and verse 15. And he said, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place." So even Jesus verbally referred to Daniel's prophecies.
Yeah, that's interesting. I tell you what, in some future episode, we're going to come back to the book of Daniel and just talk about Daniel and prophecy, because it's such a big topic that we can't really cover it. I know we're out of time anyway, but Daniel is the linchpin of prophecy in the Bible. That's why the scholars have tried so hard to undermine it. And then that's a great book. We might even do 2 episodes on Daniel and prophecy. But I wanted to read one scripture before we finish. This is Daniel 6, Daniel and the lion's den. Once all the jealous administrators put the pressure on the emperor to throw Daniel in the lion's den, verse 14, chapter 6, "Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him." He worked all night. He couldn't find a legal way to save Daniel. He knew that those guys had played on his vanity and tricked him to get rid of their rival that he wanted to promote. And he realized he'd been manipulated. And then he asked, the next morning when he wakes up, he calls out because he couldn't sleep all night, worried about Daniel being eaten by lions. But there's something about Daniel this man starts to believe. And he says, Daniel, in the end he says, "Was your God able to save you from the lions?" And of course Daniel said, "Oh, king, live forever. God sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions, and I'm in great shape." Daniel was quite safe in the lion's den. And then of course they pulled Daniel out, and all the guys that plotted against Daniel, the king put in there. And the interesting thing, not only were those lions hungry, they were so hungry those men's feet didn't even touch the bottom of the cage, or whatever that little thing was they're in. The lions ripped them apart as they lowered them in there.
Amazing. That's good. There's Daniel. There's a couple aspects. This is the kind of the government, the discipline, the faith that Daniel had aspect of it, and then another program, like you said, cover all the prophecies, which what most people refer to the general Christian world likes to talk about the prophecies and that. But he was a huge example for discipline and faithfulness and holding the line, and then we can cover the rest at another time.
Yeah, great hero. And one thing about Daniel, he won victories. And all of his great trials, he held firm. God rewarded him with victories. He got promoted. He got raises. And people respected him. And can you imagine, after those guys plotting against Daniel were thrown in the den and got ripped apart, can you imagine all the other bureaucrats, when now that Daniel's in charge? Would you want to be scheming and plotting against Daniel?
You'd think they learn.
I think not. See what happened to that other bunch. They got thrown to the lions. So, Daniel's God backs him up in a big way. Anyway, Daniel was victorious, and I think you can show faith, be strong, and diplomatic like he was, so the leaders liked him, and be victorious like Daniel.
Well, maybe the lions were on a fast of water and unpleasant vegetables that day.
No butter for you. All right. Well, it's been about an hour. Is there anything else we want to cover on this subject, gentlemen?
Well, I was thinking, let me mention the next 3 subjects we have, and maybe people find those interesting. Maybe the next 4. I'll just rattle them off. Next week is the parable of the sheep and the goats, Matthew 25. The week after that, Ephraim, Manasseh, and David's royal line and throne. That could be an interesting topic. Now that we have the queen is having their second child, right? I mean the princess of. He is the Duke of. What do they call the crown prince in England? He has a title.
I don't know.
And she's the Duchess of York, whatever her title is.
Windsor.
Beg your pardon? Anyway, they're having another baby, so the royal line's getting bigger. 619, understanding the third commandment. 626, another Bible hero, Nehemiah, and his famous quote, "A man like me." And next week, the parable of the sheep and the goats. I presume we have to assume that's a warning to all of us, right?
All right. Well, we had a good time down at Land Between the Lakes last week. I hope. Let's see. What did it say? Duke of Cambridge. That's what the title is. Sorry. But anyway, so if anytime you get a chance to come to one of the holy days or Pentecost or feast, if you're not currently going, if you can at all make it, it is such a wonderful thing to be able to attend that. So,
And
well, I'm gonna.
It's June
Go ahead.
12th next year. June 12th, Pentecost 2016.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's later next year. All right. We're gonna say we're gonna play our intro, and then we're gonna sign off, gentlemen. We were hoping to see Dan down there, but he didn't make it.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
We'll see you next week.